There is a hashtag on Twitter to defund the BBC. Now, nearly on a daily basis, the bias of the BBC is becoming exposed with ever greater clarity. So let's take a closer look at exactly what's going on here. From the Express, new campaign to defund the BBC sees explosion in support after launch. A new campaign to end the BBC licence fee saw a rapid growth in support, picking up 60,000 followers on Twitter alone within 48 hours of launch. And now, why is this happening? Now, to justify the TV tax, the BBC licence fee, of course, the BBC should follow its royal charter. This is a royal charter here from the BBC's own website. Let's look at point 1 of the charter: to provide impartial news and information to help people understand and engage with the world around them. Do you think that the BBC are fulfilling the first obligation of the Royal Charter? Well, I've got a few links here to see exactly how the bias of the BBC has been exposed. BBC bias laid bare. Study proves BBC is overwhelmingly biased against Brexit. The corporation's flagship Radio 4 programme today has featured just 3.2% of guests in favour of leaving the EU. What surprise that is. Pro-Remain, pro-establishment corporation, the BBC. So of 4,275 guests on Today between 2005 and 2015 who talked about the EU, only 132 were Brexiteers. What a surprise. If anybody couldn't see the Remainer bias of the BBC in the run-up to the 2016 referendum, I don't know which BBC were you looking at, but I think it was clear to everybody on both sides, both Remainers and Brexiteers, that the inherent bias of the British Broadcasting Corporation. Now, obviously, this has angered the Tories. The BBC is a bit more complicated than just a normal left-wing, right-wing bias. They tend to just favour the establishment. They tend to favour the status quo. They don't really want things to change. So they don't always favour the left, but it's not really... The Tories are obviously out. They're angry now, right? So the BBC have tried to stitch the Tories up over Brexit, and they have a slight left-wing bias, which obviously the Tories aren't really in favour of. The BBC will naturally favour Labour. This obviously angers the Tories. So former Tory minister sends BBC chief's 4-page report outlining disgraceful bias. This has become even more relevant lately with the whole Cummins Gate situation. So Emily Matlis back on Newsnight in wake of Cummins row. BBC presenter returns for first time since being ruled to have broken impartiality guidelines. And this obviously became even more relevant just in the last few days with the riot or the protest turning violent in London. 27 police officers injured during largely peaceful anti-racism protests in London. Now, protests are fine. I mean, you could argue why there's the Corona thing, maybe people shouldn't be protesting, but I by and large support everybody's right to protest. I don't care about coronavirus. Protesting, exercising your rights in the UK is far more important than a flu-like illness. So I have nothing against people protesting, of course, violent protesting, rioting, knocking police officers off their horses, of course, isn't a good thing. But the BBC just needs to their job, BBC News' job is just to say what happened when and maybe why. Okay, just give some insight into why stuff's happening. I don't want their bias. I don't want them saying, this was a largely peaceful protest and then clearly a picture of showing absolute chaos in the centre of London. That's not their job, and of course people are waking up to that now. So this came out late 2019, 3rd of September 2019 from Guido Fawkes. Is the BBC politically biased? And 64% of the public now think the BBC is either somewhat or greatly biased. So people are waking up. I mean, there's only so long you can bend the truth. In some cases, just flat out lie to people and them not wake up to that. Now, of course, the blowback from when people start distrusting the BBC and see them for what they are, essentially a bunch of liars, people become angry about paying the licence fee. So this is from the Times. Scrap licence fee and make BBC earn its money. Say half of Britons support a commercial model for the BBC and would like the broadcaster to make its money through advertisements or subscriptions, new poll shows. Now, this is obviously, of course, with the trend of the younger generation away from traditional media to things like YouTube and other on-demand platforms. Why would you want to pay, £157 a year now for this very outdated system? It's very archaic, the way they apply the law, that if you watch anything live broadcast, even if it's not through the BBC, you should still pay this tax. I mean, it's absolutely silly. I mean, if the BBC just stuck to producing unbiased news and programmes, I would actually happily pay for that service. Unfortunately, that's never going to happen. It's structurally biased now. It would I don't think it's even possible. I don't think it's even possible to have a overhaul of the BBC, and just the rot is set in, right? You just need to basically fire everybody at the BBC. Just start with the cleaners and work your way up, because the structural bias in there is just rotten to the core. You know, the people that work there, the same people, middle class. BBC talks about diversity, right? The people that have the managerial jobs and the people that call the shots, they're middle class. They've been to the same universities, they socialise in the same fields, they are the same group of people, they live in this little bubble world. It's why the BBC, I think, was so taken aback by the whole Brexit thing. They live in their middle class, university educated bubble world, and they don't realise there's a whole United Kingdom outside of that, and that's why they're so out of touch. So I don't think the BBC can be overhauled. I don't think they'll ever cut the bias out of it. I'm glad that the hashtag Defund The BBC is making the rounds now. I mean, I've made plenty of videos. I'll leave some of them in the description of how to legally not pay the BBC license fee. I mean, my chosen way of doing it is just using Amazon Fire Stick. I pretty much only watch YouTube and other similar platforms to YouTube, and maybe some Netflix, although I'm losing interest in Netflix anyway. But it's so easy to do now. I'm glad this is making the rounds now. And there's so many people that comment on the videos that I made on this have stopped paying their TV license, and that only pleases me more, because every time someone cancels a license fee, that's a little chip closer to the failure of the BBC. I don't think it's going to work on a subscription model. I don't think it's going to work on an advertiser basis. I mean, who would pay to have their adverts on the BBC? I think viewing figures are falling every year. People are waking up to the inherent bias. Just people are bored of the BBC. You can only push people so far before eventually they will bite back, and people are sick and tired of BBC products. I consume essentially no BBC products at this time, certainly no TV and certainly no radio, which is an interesting one anyway, guys. I'm glad this hashtag is making the rounds. If you're on Twitter, maybe share it. I don't really use Twitter. But there's a whole host of videos out there on YouTube. If you're still paying your TV license, I urge you to stop paying it. You'll never look back. I know so many of you have already stopped paying. So that's it for this video. Jason from Liberty Punkers sign off. As always, if you like it, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.